Hey everyone. Hi
Jenna,
Avery.
thank you so much. So welcome everybody who's here. Thank you for tuning in to our Activated Thursday series, where every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we have different activists from across the nation. Today, Jenna Yuan from Student Voice has been so gracious as to speak with us today. So thank you so much, Jenna, for coming on. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Talk about where you're based and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to do it. My name is Jenna Yuan. I just graduated high school and I'm going to be an incoming first year at Columbia University in the city of New York next year.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm based in Seattle, Washington right now, and I'm the director of communications at Student Voice, which is completely student-led education equity focused nonprofit.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So I wanted to ask you, I know that you, as you mentioned, you do work in education equity, but when you started your activism, was it always education equity for you?
I think it was definitely a huge component of it. I think I first started um, like being involved in, I think, advocacy in my state and specifically in my state legislature. So I live in Washington, and obviously education is a huge part of what young people like experience and like an issue that affects them really deeply. But I am also was interested in and obviously am still interested in issues around like youth justice and youth health, which I think are all intersecting with education.
Yeah, for sure. What was it about education equity that really drew you to it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think education is just such a huge part of shaping like our solutions and like just the approach we take to a lot of different issues in our world. I think education can shape people to be more like empathetic towards people who are different than them and to like the current injustices in our world. It's something that everyone should have equal access to. It determines a lot of things around economic mobility and opportunity, and often students don't get to control the quality of their educations, which is something that really resonates with me. um, I'm a second generation immigrant. My parents are immigrants from China, and education has played a huge role in like how I see the world. So it's like really personally important to me.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's the same thing for me too. Like education is the root of everything, like you mentioned, and it's so important. And it's so unfortunate and unfair that we start out in different places just based on our zip code, and the color of our skin can determine so much of our education and therefore like our opportunity later in life.
Definitely agreed.
So you said you started your work out like in your state legislature. That must have been like really like nerve wracking, like at the state level. When did you first realize like, oh wow, like my voice actually matters and I do actually have like a say in this?
Yeah, I think it's like still something that I like struggle with because I think a lot of like governmental structures are just not in not set up to have people under 18 involved. A lot of like I guess politicians, legislators, people who are involved in government specifically, like don't want to hear from anyone unless they're a constituent, unless like they can have an impact on whether the politician is in office or not. I think part of like realizing my voice mattered was really like trying to realize that like my agency isn't determined by like the legitimacy that like institutions and structures like recognize it, but rather by like the power that I can have to influence things around me without like depending on those and realizing that they're like the norm, that I can change those institutions.
When do you think you came to that realization?
Gosh, I think it's definitely like been a slow process throughout like high school and throughout doing all my work, activism work right now, even still. I definitely think the work of like other organizers and activists has been really instrumental in helping me realize that. Like just in the past few weeks, I've really been inspired by like Black youth organizers and the work they're doing organized around police-free schools and anti-racist curriculum, and know that I want to follow their lead and be like a good supportive ally to the work that often them and their communities have been doing for a long time.
I know for a few actors, like a lot of actors, and like for me as well, we have like this moment that was kind of like, oh, like I'm legit. That kind of like helped us realize, oh, okay, like I'm actually doing something. Do you have a moment like that for you?
Yeah, I think like a good one would be so I in my state, like something that I was really involved in Washington was helping to pass comprehensive sex education in the state legislature. So it was something that had been fought over for a long time, and this year, in my senior year in high school, it finally passed. It was
Amazing.
yeah, thank you. It was pretty politically controversial just because a lot of parents were like, well, you're teaching my second grader what like sex is. And really, that's not what it was. It's like things that are like, hey, like you shouldn't let anyone touch you without your consent, which like helps like stop things like sexual abuse and assault when like children don't even know that's wrong. Like teaching them that like they have bodily autonomy and they have boundaries can like really stop prevent some of that trauma and violence from happening. So that was definitely a huge like moment for me. And I think like the positive, tangible impact that that will have is like really meaningful to me.
That's amazing. But it sounds like it took a lot of patience, like wow, like your senior year.
Yeah, definitely. It had been something I'd been like working on and had been proposed for a long time before me. But I've been personally working on since my sophomore year of high school. So pretty huge.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it requires lots of patience. What are some of like the other frustrations that you kind of feel like being a student activist?
Yeah, definitely. I think that like it can be difficult because as I said earlier, like I don't think a lot of people in institutions really want to listen to young people and especially not like young activists of color, and especially not young women and other gender minorities. And so I think it can be really just like disheartening to see that and like to be treated like with disrespect and that you're lesser than and that your voice and your opinions don't matter as much. And also like some of the like actions of in recent times around education have been just really disheartening. I think a specific instance I can point to is Move School Forward has been involved, and Student Voice, the organization I personally work with, has been involved in sort of fighting for equitable reopening plans. And actually, recently, the Trump administration announced that they were going to pressure governors using funding to open all schools like in person, regardless of like a student's personal situation, regardless of like where COVID cases are during that time. And just because like he wants to pretend everything is normal before the November election, and to see like students used as basically like a political bargaining chip, to be treated with like that like amount of disrespect, and to be like seeing like federal leaders make such an irresponsible decision for like the 55 million students that there are around the country, pretty upsetting to me.
Right, right. So this is really a time where we have to step up because like we've seen that our federal government does not care about us. Um and it's really up to the student activists as it's always been too because like we're the primary stakeholders in all of this and we know best the circumstances and what needs to be changed because like we are in that system. Um so it's amazing that like you're continuing to do that work. I know the youth activism project we're doing that as well. I'm hoping that it's easier for you being in like a liberal area kind of, but it's like you're saying like it doesn't matter because it's still difficult when you don't really have voting power.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But it's interesting to hear how like it's still difficult. Like don't be fooled, you may live in a liberal area. But yeah, it's the same for me. In Montgomery County, we like to herald ourselves as like crazy liberal, but we've actually had issues with education equity here. We've been trying to get our boundaries changed because we've got like segregation within our school system, and there's been lots of pushback. It was actually really disconcerting. This one candidate who ran off of a platform that was basically like pro segregation and like neighborhood schools and all these dog whistle arguments that you hear from like the 60s and 70s. He ran off of that platform. He won third place, like in the election, which is so disconcerting. Like we herald ourselves as so progressive, but here's this guy, that's his platform, he won third place. So we really need to reevaluate. And I guess I'm wondering, were you sort of uncovering some of that as you did your activism work in Seattle?
Yeah, definitely. And like what you said about your schools being segregated in your county, like really resonates with me. I live in the suburbs of Seattle, and the schools there are like funded like very well, and which is very different from the schools like in different parts of Seattle. and we definitely have a lot of segregation by income, a lot of segregation by race in our education system as well. And I think that is definitely, like you said, one of the examples of the issues that even like sort of like progressivism can't solve really, or like hasn't attempted to solve, sort of like those underlying inherent issues like that they themselves might benefit from.
Right, right. And it must be even more difficult going back to like school funding in a place like Washington State, where you also have like Native American like reservations, and that must be tricky too. I'm just curious, when you have legislation, I know they're like their own like sovereign territories. So does that affect them as well? And how have you ever like advocated for their behalf as well in terms of like education equity?
Yeah, I have never worked with like indigenous like students or like personally or like tribal schools specifically. I know that like definitely they are like super underfunded, and there are problems with specifically culturally relevant education for those populations in Washington, um concerning like language, concerning religion and culture, and it's definitely a huge issue that needs to be worked on.
Right, right. So there's like this added component. I know that we don't like have reservations, not to my knowledge, in Montgomery County. So there's like that added component for you with that as well. So maybe that's something like your successors could carry on. Do you have people in Seattle that are going to be carrying on like the student voice work that you've been doing?
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually part of an organization in Washington called the Washington State Legislative Youth Advisory Council, and the students, I guess they're now not my peers because I am in college, I guess, but um, my peers there are super incredible, and I'm sure that they'll continue the work of making Washington State a more equitable place for all students.
Yeah. Can you let us in on some of the things you're like they're planning for the future?
Yeah, for sure. So every year we have like a summit called Action Day where we invite around 100 students to the Washington State Capitol, and run like civic action, civic engagement events. We also advocate on a bunch of legislation, and we're also doing something about policing right now in.
That's amazing. And I guess also since we're both here, we should talk a little bit about what we've been doing with the Move Schools Forward campaign.
For sure.
So do you want to like let in our audience on
Oh
what?
yeah.
Yeah, some of the yeah.
For sure. So the Move School Forward campaign is a set of 10 key principles for reopening schools in the fall, so that we don't just return to a normal that didn't serve and didn't work for a lot of students, but we make schools like more equitable and serve students better than they ever have before. So this includes things like having students at the table for discussions concerning their education, funding schools equitably, meeting students' basic needs with things like school lunch and free school supplies, and anti-racist curriculum, and a bunch of other really, I think, pertinent issues that need to be considered by policymakers and educators when reopening schools.
Right, right. Something that I think is so interesting this time is that coronavirus is exacerbating a lot of the things that we already knew, us activists doing education equity. So it's awful, but in a way, it also gives us like that impetus to like push and be like, hey, like we've been seeing this, and now you see how it's even worse, and kind of like give that push to really make the change that we've been asking for so many years.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I really, really agree with that. I think that COVID-19 has only exacerbated the issues that the Youth Activism Project and us at Student Voice have been working on for a long time. And it's good to see that like people are beginning to see that, but we need to realize that like schools don't just matter during COVID-19, but they should matter all the time.
Yes, yeah. And for those who want to follow what Move Schools Forward has been doing, I guess Jenna is on their account right now. I can drop it in the comments. You can DM the Youth Activism Project if you have any questions about the work that they're doing, if you'd like to help. Jenna, what are some other ways that people can get involved?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll let you share in a sec. I'm sure the Youth Activism Project is doing like great things. But of course, at Move School Forward, you can sign on to the Move School Forward campaign and our 30 days of action at moveschoolforward.org. You can also sign up for the Education Justice Collective on the Ground Slack channel, in which we'll collect opportunities for engagement with school reopenings. For Student Voice, what we're working on is our big program launch. So this will be for our ambassador program, our organizing program, and our journalism fellowship. So ways to get involved as either an organizer or a storyteller in your community. Those applications will open in August. So we would love to have every single student who is interested in making a difference and making a change in their school. And I'll let you share about what the Youth Activism Project is doing, because I'm sure it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and one thing I would add too, if people just want to get a feel for like what we do here with the Move School Forward campaign, they can also check out our town hall that we'll be having on Monday about decolonizing curriculum. That's obviously a super important component. And I mean, it's so relevant now as the nation is kind of like reevaluating how can we actively be anti-racist, right? And looking at that culture. So I think that's like so important now, as it has always been. But people are finally like paying attention to that. With the Youth Activism Project, they house like a lot of different initiatives, and being a part of this Education Justice Collective is one of them. I'm really proud to say that my Montgomery County-based organization, Students Toward Equitable Public Schools, is housed by the Youth Activism Project. We've already had lots of gains, and I'm just like proud to say that we've gotten like considerable like political clout, even though we've only been in this arena for a short time. I think people are realizing how important education equity is, and maybe we came on the scene at an important time. But we're already making recommendations as to how they should look at technology for this coming school year, seeing as it's important for different populations. Working class families, they don't have the same access to technology. Students with disabilities, they need different types of supports. And for them, like nonverbal students, for example, like iPads are so important. And that's like what they would get at school, and like speech therapy is what they would get at school. So just kind of making sure that that's what our school has in mind when they're moving forward. So we're really proud to say that we're a part of that. We've also been talking about taking out police officers in our schools, which of course is part of the larger like Move School Forward campaign. So yeah, just like things like that. We've also been looking at like how coronavirus exacerbates the disparities in our school system. Some different groups like in our county have been doing tutoring to kind of mitigate some of that over the summer. So, I mean, in times like this, I'm just grateful to have a community like Move School Forward and people within like my county who are doing this work and making sure that, you know, like Trump doesn't got our back, but we have each other's backs, you know, and we will get through this as a community.
Definitely. That sounds super amazing. And we're so, so, so grateful for, I think Student Voice has students on the ground for organizations specifically on the ground like yours who are doing amazing, amazing work in local communities.
Thank you so much. Yeah, same with Student Voice.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about like what Move School Forward is doing, but I guess I'm curious to see like what has Student Voice been doing, and are you guys nationally based as well? Okay.
Yeah. So we're a national organization, but we have local presence in the form of our students in our programs all across the country.
That's amazing. Yeah. And to be like the coordinator of that like nationally, how do you guys do that? Because like different localities, of course, they have different like issues. So
yeah,
how do you
for sure.
National response and like
and
as a collective?
Incredible question. First of all, that's something that we have to be really, really considerate of and really careful about at Student Voice, because we don't want to pretend like we have one like solution, one federal solution that can solve for the needs of all localities. We always want to be really cognizant of both like local needs and local organizers who've been doing the work for a long time in their communities. We never want to like go into a community and say like we know the one answer, like we know everything. Instead, our role, I think, is to provide institutional support and like network partnership advice to those students to connect them to, like, for example, if a student is working on a campaign about school lunch in their school district, we can connect them to our national partners at like No Kid Hungry and the Urban School Food Alliance. and the School Lunch for All campaign and get them plugged into those resources, help them with press opportunities. And that's what we really see as our role, not to like drive the issue because we know nothing about the issue in many people's local communities, but to just be this background support behind it.
That's incredible. Yeah, and it's so amazing that you can pull from all these different national groups to support people who are just getting started. I know firsthand how difficult that can be starting from the, well, not the ground up, but my organization in Montgomery County, it is difficult. And I was so lucky to like have that community with like the Youth Activism Project and now like the Education Justice Collective. So there's definitely something to be said about like having already existing structures. And I think that's what's so beautiful about like Move School Forward too. We understand like as a national collective, there is no one solution. And we really allow autonomy for individuals who are just getting started in organizations. There's really something there for everybody. We just want to be able to support each other and also understand like these basic demands that every child and student can benefit from.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agreed.
Yeah. So do you want to tell the audience a little bit about like what you do specifically in your role with Student Voice?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned before, I'm Student Voice's Director of Communications, which sounds like, I don't know, really vague title, but I provide like support on a lot of stuff, our social media, our press presence, pitching out student writing and op-eds to different news outlets. That's something we're really focusing on. We think it's important to have, like, if you're writing a story about students, you should talk to students. So providing those connections. Recently, we've also started running rapid response communications campaigns. So our most recent one was around test optional college admissions. And we were the student-led arm of that campaign to call over 70 colleges and universities to go test optional in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And also providing support on a lot of the other work we do, including helping develop resources for students and helping connect students to like the work that they want to get involved in. So a lot of my role recently has been connecting students who DM Student Voice or DM Move School Forward to the specific outlet so they can get started in like creating the change that they want to see in their community.
That's incredible. And if you want to drop like the handle for Student Voice, in case our audience is interested in seeing the work that you do, and seeing like how they can be supported by you, I guess I will also drop my handle because I am chasing clout for the STEPS account for Students for Equitable Public Schools. So.
Yeah, as the communications director, I have to say no shame in that.
Yeah, so I think like we're almost out of time, and I guess like one more question I have for you is just like what would you say to students who want to get started, maybe if it's not exactly in education equity, but just like any activism in general?
Yeah, for sure. I would say like first, you should you should apply for Student Voices programs because we'd love to help you get started and connect you with the resources you need. But like really like just don't be intimidated. I think jumping in feet first and not being scared of institutions and really just like saying what you mean and saying what you need and plugging into networks of people who feel the same way can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think connections are so important too because like I found in Montgomery County, we have like a very strong activist spirit, which is amazing, but oftentimes we have groups that are doing the same thing at the exact same time. So it's just so important to kind of like conglomerate and see like how you can work together to really like bolster what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So also I guess one more thing too, what makes it worth it for you, like the activism that you do?
Yeah, definitely. I think that like the work I do at Student Voice is really meaningful to me and like on a personal level, I think it really, really is like doing good to fight for educational equity every day, even if it just looks like writing an op-ed, which doesn't seem like activism or organizing, but I think I just like remember like the role I'm playing in promoting student voice and like the awesome work that our organizing and programming team does to a larger audience and to students who might really need that connection in that outlet. And so that definitely makes some of the endless seeming Zoom calls worth it.
Yeah, yeah. And you brought up such a good point too. I think when people think about activism, they think about like the sexy part, like protesting, and like being on the news, whatever. But it's really the work that you do on the ground, and like the op-eds and like the emails that you send out, and just like the simple like tweets, just like educating your following. So yeah, it's great that you guys do all of that, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And like likewise, I think we're like Student Voice, the national organization, and just like a lot of national organizers and work are really indebted to the work like organizations like yours are doing on the ground in local communities every day. And that's something that at Student Voice we really, really care to amplify.
Thank you so much. It's been so great having you on today. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. Yeah, and if you have any questions about what we're doing, you can DM Move School Forward, the Youth Activism Project, or Student Voice. We really encourage you guys to get involved in education equity or any activism, that you're interested in.
Yeah, for
Thank you.
sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye.